Welcome to Module 4, Video 3 from the Safe and Effective Use of AI in Education Online Resources. Inclusion in education is an ongoing process aimed at offering an ambitious quality education for all learners while respecting diversity and the different needs, strengths and areas for development and learning expectations of individual students. It goes beyond ensuring attendance and achievement, focusing on identifying and removing barriers to learning, improving well-being and enabling full participation. As Ofsted emphasises, inclusion is about being ambitious for every child to ensure that all pupils, including those with SEND or from disadvantaged backgrounds, receive the same high-quality curriculum.
So what I need teachers to do is think, as a result of their label, what are the barriers that are being seen? And then which tech, which AI piece, which resource can help me be better and more efficient at addressing that barrier? What I think all of us should be very mindful of is that we should never ever pick tech for the reason of doing something that I can do myself better.
While we won't be able to explore every use case related to inclusion in this video, we will explore some key principles, and you will also find examples in the accompanying PowerPoint presentation.
When we talk about digital accessibility tools, it's important to remember that many effective assistive technologies don't use AI, and among the AI-powered tools available, not all use generative AI. Many accessibility features that have existed for years, such as voice typing, screen readers, text-to-speech and colour overlays, don't necessarily use AI. These established tools remain valuable and shouldn't be overlooked in favour of newer AI-based solutions. There are also a growing number of specialist tools that use a range of AI technologies to improve accessibility, such as apps that describe a scene in detail using a phone's camera, or dictation technologies that adapt to atypical speech.
An important principle is to consider the pupil's or student's particular needs ahead of the tool. It can be beneficial to explore a range of tools so that you're familiar with what's possible. It's also important to always consult an appropriately trained professional to support your decision-making when finding specific accessibility tools for a learner's needs. You should always consider the specific needs ahead of the diagnostic label. For example, you may have several learners who have been diagnosed with dyslexia, but their individual support needs and plans may differ significantly, which will lead to different accessibility tools being selected.
So if you prompt anything for a child who identifies as an autistic learner or ADHD or dyslexia or whatever, it will usually take a deficit lens. Not always, but it will usually take a deficit lens, and it will make assumptions. For instance, an autistic child, if you ask for an image, it will put ear defenders on, and it will put the child by itself away from people because it is assuming that the child does not like to socialise, which, you know, does that actually reflect your child that you're trying to personalise for? So, and for an ADHD learner, it would put little bubbles trying to show kind of what the child was thinking. And this is quite obvious in images, so you can address it. But these assumptions are baked into the lesson plans, the adaptations, the expectations, the cognitive load. And so there are patterns, you can try it yourself, there are patterns if you put these labels into your lesson plans, and one of the major use cases we're going to have for adapting is adapting lesson plans, adapting schemes of work, adapting lesson materials and resources. And so it's very, very vitally important to consider the labels that you use and add in that context of your specific child without obviously breaching confidentiality. So if you are talking about a child who identifies as autistic, you need to then talk about that child, their preferences, their needs, their strengths, what works for them. And then you will find the output reflects your context a little bit more, rather than it reflecting the statistical norms, flawed statistical norms, in my opinion, of what an autistic learner is and what their needs are. So we are not there yet in terms of learning materials. And sometimes, with very obvious prompting, it will actually talk about trying to be neuroaffirming and respectful and diverse. But often if you work through iterations of a prompt and look at your output, it will show up time and time again later on because it's there in the underlying data set. So awareness is key, and mitigation is key, and context for your specific children is key. Otherwise, you're getting output for children who are not sitting in your class, and I don't think that is acceptable.
So when you work with colleagues to select an appropriate tool, what you should first ask is what barrier is the learner facing before considering what tool, AI or otherwise, might help address that barrier. Sometimes a more established tool that may be more appropriate than a newer AI-based tool, and sometimes the best tool will be built into the device's operating system instead of being an additional application or software.
Generative AI can support learners with special educational needs and disabilities, SEND, in various ways. For teachers and teaching assistants, AI might help create differentiated resources more efficiently, generate alternative explanations of concepts, produce visual supports or social stories, or adapt text to different reading levels. This approach respects the individuality of each learner and is more likely to produce a result that will need less adaptation to be appropriate. It's also important to remember that AI tools can generate resources using different media. If you need to create some personalised emotion cards for a learner, you could prompt an AI tool to generate a range of images or graphics around a particular interest the student has, or that may be more meaningful for the individual learner.
We've seen a really positive impact for our students with SEND in particular through our universal design for learning approach to teaching. So we're thinking about removing barriers to lessons. We're thinking about how can we preempt any barriers that may be in place before we get to there so that they can independently access the learning at the level that's right for them. And having an AI tool to act as a coach with a teacher to say, I'm thinking about a UDL approach to my lesson. Can we have a look at this lesson plan? Can you talk through anything that might be missing? Can you simulate this lesson and identify any errors or misconceptions that I might not have thought of? We can slowly just start to use that to pick out some of those barriers and go even further with that approach. That's been really impactful.
So I'm using it constantly, pretty much in most lessons. So it could be for adaptations, it could be for tweaking it for children with slightly different needs who need it. And also it's making my time a lot more efficient. So I'm spending a lot more time with the learners, and it makes the admin tasks much quicker.
If you choose a piece of technology to assist a child with, that necessarily isn't going to work for every subject. So, for example, if you use speech to text in English, you wouldn't necessarily use that in maths. The child may still want to actually use good old-fashioned pen and paper. I don't think you can get away from the fact that children with special educational needs are often very complex, and when it comes to creating support for them, we need to think about every facet, their personality, their likes, their dislikes, what they're good at, and what interests them, so that you can actually put a support package together that really fulfills their needs and helps them thrive and achieve.
Yesterday in RE, in Year 6, they had to create a paragraph on the themes on the story of Moses. So I put into AI, without putting an age bracket, of what I wanted to achieve. So I asked it to say, explain the themes used in the story of Moses. It then came back with language that was far too high for Year 6. So then I said, could you now please make it into something for an age group of 12-year-olds. I always go a little bit higher than the age group we're looking at, because AI I don't think has quite learned yet what is expected of children at a certain age. I looked at the age 12, it was good, so I used that for the Year 6. If I want to use it for low attainers, obviously I would just lower the age. It's helpful to use AI, especially when I want to produce something, but I don't just take what it says, I then edit it or ask for it to add more things in if it's not quite right.
Saying a student with autism or a student with ADHD or a student with dyslexia isn't differentiation. You're just using one brush for everyone, you know? Autism is a spectrum. There's a lot on that spectrum. If we are going to be using AI to help us differentiate resources for students with diagnosed learning difficulties, then we need to be specific in how we're doing that. and really thinking about what are their reading ages, what are their writing ages, what are their interests, what is the way this person works. Are they going to be better with an image-rich text? Are they going to be better with a text-rich text? Do they need a list of keywords that then we need to break down for them so they understand those later? And if we're just thinking in generic terms of dyslexia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, that's not meeting those individual students' needs. And actually it can be quite dangerous because not everyone is the same.
An example of a well-established tool that can support learners with barriers to writing is voice dictation, which in most cases makes use of AI. For some learners, and in certain circumstances, this can enable them to create a larger amount of work than if they were writing. However, consideration also needs to be given to how the pupil or student is progressing in writing, carefully deciding when to provide the technological support and when to work on writing. Widely accessible generative AI has made it possible for learners with barriers to structuring sentence to express their ideas with their voice, and then the AI tool will rewrite and structure it. This type of technology might be useful for certain learners, but should be considered on an individual basis.
And I think it will be game-changing for young people with SEND, particularly when it can break down a question into manageable, achievable, readable, that they can actually understand and they can work their way through.
Students, they've reached the age of 16, they still can't read, but they still have to access the big bad world out there. They still have to read menus, they still have to read things on items they want to buy, but there are apps that they can use, and actually they're incredibly excited about using to enable them to read these things literally by holding their phone over something and it will read it out. They can hold their phone over a barcode and it will tell them what they're holding and it will give them various information about it. But these are things that I've literally seen our pupils just so excited about using these things because it's opening up the world for them. So we think AI is a very, very good thing, and we're really excited about embracing all the things that are yet to come.
Some of our learners have used an app that has AI to support with their reading. Some teachers have used AI to create some entry-level questions for morning work.
So for example, an automotive teacher we work with, he gives his files to an AI tool and then he's able to summon and speak only to those files. And equally, his students are able to summon and speak to those files that have been curated with clear intention by their course tutor, which means they're not going beyond that. They're staying in a particular area, the learners, when they're accessing it. And equally, the learners are able to get podcast overviews of said materials. And that, from an accessibility and inclusivity viewpoint, is particularly impactful. That automotive teacher is able to generate podcast overviews of his slides, his handouts, and the videos he creates in the workshop. And one learner in particular, who can't always be present in the lessons, because he's a young carer and has a part-time job, is able to listen to those podcast overviews when he is travelling to his part-time job or perhaps on the bus home from college. So the idea of adapting and personalising resources is particularly interesting.
In Scott's example that we just seen, the college were able to do this as they had considered the safety of the large language model and had permissions in place for the content that was uploaded.
In order for me to be able to use AI in my lessons, I had to research certain websites, make sure that the data is not shared with the website or students' data is not shared. And after I checked all these features and the terms and conditions, I shared it with my IT department and they shared it with our trust for approval. So out of the 2-3 AI image generator that I proposed, one was successful and I was able to use it. They had to write a short story and then they had to first write the setting of the story. They had to use a lot of imagery and literary devices. After they've written the text, they had to put it on the AI image generator, and then the image would be generated. They had to rewrite specific areas, so they would look at the image and recognize what the prompt did not, what the AI image generator did not take from their description, and then improve that sentence.
For learners with English as an additional language, AI can provide valuable support. Most generative AI tools can help create bilingual resources, translate key vocabulary, or provide explanations in a learner's home language. AI can simplify complex texts whilst maintaining key concepts, or generate multiple versions of instructions at different language levels. As in the previous example, the level of support you provide through adaptive resources or translation tools needs to take into consideration the needs of the individual learner and what will enable them to progress in their learning, as well as the English language. Always have translations checked by a fluent speaker where possible, or try translating it back into English using several tools, particularly for important communications with families. AI may miss nuances or make errors with less common languages. Remember that regional variations of languages can often differ significantly, so ensure you're specific about this when prompting an AI tool.
I think AI can play a really, really vital role in supporting learners who use English as an additional language. I think it goes beyond translation. I think translation can help, but I think that's a relatively small part of it. I think in terms of access to the curriculum, I think there's a lot that you can do, from simplifying texts to chunking instructions to producing or supporting vocabulary, producing sentence stems, and I think helping teachers to adapt materials that target the levels at which learners are working in terms of their English language proficiency. I think there are lots of opportunities around those things, which can be really valuable and helpful to teachers. I think in terms of translation as a whole, I think it does play a role. I think particularly if learners are very new to language, and potentially new to the classroom. And that's going to help them access the lesson. My slight caution around it would be ensuring that it's accurate, that those translations are accurate. I mean, in terms of some of the less widely spoken languages, I know there can still be challenges around translating large pieces of text. So I think for me, it's just making sure that those things have been checked by somebody who speaks that language. And certainly if you've got any kind of sensitive information or really important, information that you need to be shared, that is done properly, and that you really make sure that those are a good translation. So I think it's thinking about what you are wanting to achieve from the lesson and making decisions from there. But my default wouldn't always be translation. If you think about the range of language proficiency that you may have within a classroom, you could want maybe 3 different versions of the same text with slightly, more or complex language in each of them, and it can be pretty good at those things. But again, I think it's like making sure that a teacher critically engages with what comes out of it and checks it and all of that. But I don't think it should seek to replace the high quality and kind of rich talk and social engagement and everything that you can get from being a part of a diverse multilingual classroom.
There is the potential for AI to reduce some of the administrative burden on SENCOs, teaching assistants and teachers. The data in these use cases is often particularly sensitive, and so it's important to ensure that you are using a tool approved by your school or college that doesn't learn from the data uploaded and does have safeguards in place. Information about special educational needs, disabilities and additional support needs is particularly sensitive data under UK GDPR. Be extremely cautious about inputting any information about individual learners into AI tools. Even seemingly anonymised information can sometimes be identifiable and combined with other details. Always consult your data protection officer before using AI tools with any SEND-related information. AI can help draft initial versions of support plans, summarise information from multiple sources, draft staff-facing guides for supporting specific needs, or generate template letters and communications. For instance, you might upload a general guide on supporting learners with reading difficulties and your school's lesson observation framework, and then prompt, "I've uploaded 2 documents, a new guide on supporting learners with reading difficulties and our school's teaching and learning framework. Please create a 1-page staff-facing summary of practical classroom strategies for supporting learners with dyslexia." Structure it around the key moments in a typical lesson: starter activity, main teaching, independent work, and plenary. Use bullet points and keep the language accessible for all staff, including those new to teaching. The summary should be generic guidance, but emphasise the range of needs of individual learners and therefore how it's also important to know individual support plans. The resulting guidance should be checked by a suitable expert, but could then be shared at a staff meeting, or included in an induction pack for new colleagues, or used as a quick reference for supply teachers, saving the SENCO time while ensuring a consistent approach across the school or college. This is just one example that has the potential to alleviate some of the workload and free up more time for building relationships with learners, working directly with families, and providing the human support that makes inclusion so meaningful.
The administrative burden on SEN is obvious, and we've seen it across the country. It's a known problem. What we tried to do was help to support the team. So we've built a solution that can ingest essentially all of the data from the feeder schools around the student and their access arrangements. And that data can then be synthesised and help us produce our Form 8s and Form 9s that go out. It can pre-populate our management information system with current way of working, condition, and essentially just provide the salient data that typically required a human to read everything and synthesise it and then process what they felt were the salient points. But the administrative burden has been reduced by something like an hour a student for students on access arrangements. And that's before we get into simple solutions like our TAs using a large language model to help them understand a concept to break down to a student, or our SENCO creating a gem or a small agent to help them break down data sets to get some key information out. So when you start to look at the administration burden that falls on education, SEN is one of the biggest areas for me at the moment and the least supported. AI has a potential real impact here if it's used and harnessed correctly.
As we noted previously in this module, it's important to ensure that AI tools are never used to make high-stakes decisions. Individual education plans, EHCP contributions, and decisions about interventions require professional judgment and must remain human-led. AI can support the administrative aspects of this work in summarising documents and generating first drafts, but the professional decision-making needs to stay with the suitably qualified staff. There are some areas where using generative AI would not be appropriate, such as making decisions about whether a learner has a special educational need, determining provision or placement for individual learners, writing or finalising statutory documents such as EHCP contributions without significant professional review, providing support for social, emotional and mental health needs. These require human connection and professional expertise, although AI tools can be used to signpost students to appropriate services and support. Any application involving sensitive personal data without appropriate approvals and safeguards.
Let's start with EHCPs. So that's a really great place to start. AI can be really beneficial in helping us with that. It can take away a lot of that time-consuming paperwork. It can really help us crunch plans. However, one of the key things of that is that we still keep the human being in the loop. I know firsthand from being in lots of annual review conversations, lots of EHCP conversations, it's the conversations that help because they spark professional discussion, and that might take you down routes of ideas or concepts that you never had before. And if you're removing that element too much in it, then the AI is taking over that process, and it's not actually a personalised process anymore. You're relying on the piece of technology to give you the outcome, and there really needs to be a balance in that for where we get the AI to free up some time to have those conversations more would be the best thing. I think we're so focused on how can we do things quicker, we're not necessarily looking at how can we keep quality in these things, and there needs to be a balance between the two on that front with all paperwork, really.
When thinking about our most vulnerable learners, we should also consider the risk of anthropomorphism. This means attributing human characteristics to AI, seeing it as a friend, confidant, or emotional support. Research highlights that some learners, particularly those who may struggle with social relationships or who are seeking connection, can develop concerning attachments to AI chatbots. They may share personal information, seek emotional support from AI, or come to prefer AI interaction over human connection. This is particularly concerning because AI systems don't have the genuine understanding or empathy and cannot provide the safeguarding oversight that human relationships with vulnerable people should include. We need to support our most vulnerable learners to understand this distinction.
So essentially, AI should be used for the non-personalization of elements, and then you should still be there for that human-to-human connection. AI is vital, AI is useful, but AI should free you up to do the human-to-human thing, not free you up from not doing the human-to-human thing.
Key messages. Start with the learner's needs, not the technology. Consider established accessibility tools alongside AI solutions. Describe needs, not diagnosis labels, when prompting AI. Use AI to reduce administrative burden, freeing time for human support. Never use AI for high-stakes decisions about individual learners. Be alert to anthropomorphism risks. Protect sensitive data about vulnerable learners.